I almost approach it more like a student, which is to learn from each thing and what they've done. Uh, it's rare that I finish games these days, but I have finished a few recently. Like I said, I finished Red Dead, and I was like, I want to finish.
Whoa,
Yeah, that was 100 hours,
it's
man.
a
I was
lot of
like,
game.
hey, at the end, you're shoveling horse poop. I thought this is a great game if I'm running around shoveling horse crap at the end and actually still enjoying myself.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Noclip. Danny here, and this week I'm delighted to be joined by an up-and-coming independent developer. I feel like this kid's been making waves on the game design world now for the past 40 years, so I'm sure we'll have something to talk about. Mr. Brian Fargo, games industry legend, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm good. I'm good. It's the calm before the storm.
Right.
You know, our game goes live here soon.
It does. I think as of we're a week away from launch, but I believe by the time this goes up, the game will be out. So congratulations to future you. How are you feeling right now?
Well, the future me feels great. The present me is always high anxiety, waiting for these things to get out and in all the different configurations and all the things we have to worry about. All we do is worry.
Right.
The day, worry. So that's the emotion of the day for the next week.
Well, I mean, games development from our time interviewing devs is not exactly easy work, but trying to launch right as a global pandemic hits is perhaps sort of like the boss mode version of that. How have you been doing? Because obviously the game was meant to come out during the spring. COVID-19 made that obviously totally impossible. And now we're a number of months later. How have you and the team been doing? Like, how difficult was the past couple of months?
This has been a very unique situation. I like you said, I've been doing this a few years, and I finalized a few products, but nothing like this before. The team, you miss the physical contact with each other, and let's make this happen. Let's bring pizzas in, and because there's so much work that happens in the last period of time, as most people talk about. But now it's like, let's take that hill, and then like the programmer's by himself sitting in a room, and so there's that sense of loneliness, and and I'm right there with the troops, and we're all working, but it's not the same rallying cry. It's a more complicated process in that way. I think mentally more complicated. The team's done a great job. I mean, what they've accomplished in the last, in total, but over the last 4 weeks has been pretty phenomenal. It's kind of the nature of the beast that there's a lot of loose ends that come at the last second. So we do miss that being with each other, most definitely. There's intangibles, and sometimes I would be able to walk over and look at somebody's screen and go, that looks great. What did you do? We'll have a conversation, and then maybe that leads into a different conversation with another discipline that we try to meet up together. So that those intangibles have made it trickier.
Yeah, I imagine it's quite difficult to pin down what you miss because you don't, or what in terms of the design of the game you're missing out on because you don't know, because you're not having those ad hoc moments with your team. You're not having those like creative talks over lunch or something like that. I wanted to ask you about, I guess, the past couple of months as well in respect to how you sort of, I guess, pivoted, because there was a beta that happened just around that time as well, where you had it for your backers on Fig, I believe, who gave a bunch of feedback, and I know a lot of that has been actioned upon as well. Did you guys sort of, was it just a case of moving the date out and making sure that everyone was set up at home, or did you kind of pivot in terms of your strategy for the game's launch based on the fact that you had this sort of thicker window to finish it?
Well, I knew it was going to be a shock to the system, and there were going to be unknowns that we just didn't know about, and what we just talked about a moment ago was one of those sort of intangible feelings. And because we didn't have to get it out the next day, we didn't. Microsoft gave us the luxury that it didn't have to go, or we were going to have some gun at our head. We were able to move the date and take advantage of the time. And physically get people set up at work, and then all of there's been a lot more conversations with people on the mental toll.
Right.
There are people that loved coming to work. It was their social place to be, and now they're home alone all the time. And so more conversations are being had. Teams is great for talking, or any Skype or whatever, but just to reach out and, how are you doing, and having those conversations. So there was just all these different dynamics, that some of which we anticipated, some which we didn't. And, why put ourselves through the extra stress of saying, oh, and we have to stay to the original date? I mean, would just seem absurd. But we very much took advantage of the extra time too. We layered on even more. We did the beta backer, as you said. We've addressed thousands of things in the last couple months that maybe just quality of life things that we might not have got to. Maybe a piece of volume was too low. Maybe something wasn't telegraphed quite right. Maybe this one combat's a little frustrating at the end, and maybe they should have a little less hit point. So we're able to get into that iteration stage that we always love to have.
Excellent. I'm delighted to talk to you, because we spend a lot of time here on the podcast and also in our documentaries talking to people who've made games. And it's always talking to someone like you is always incredibly intimidating beforehand, because there's just an embarrassment of stuff we could talk about. We could go back into the old days, talk about decades of Interplay, talk about 16 years of In Exile. Obviously, all the games you've worked on in the past and all the games have been influenced by you. But even when we talk about Wasteland, there's so much to talk about just with Wasteland, with the original game back in the late 80s, with the Kickstarter for Wasteland 2 and how successful that was. And even with Wasteland 3, so much has happened over the past, is it 4 or 5 years it's been in development, with the successful funding on Fig, the 3.5. Okay, I'm giving you extra years.
Yeah, Wasteland 3.5.
Okay, nice. And of course the Microsoft acquisition as well. So we're going to I want to talk to you about a bunch of this sort of stuff, but just to sort of close off on the COVID thing, because I feel like you're one of the few people who you can really talk to about design and also about executive running companies and publishing and everything. I just want to ask you one more question about this whole scenario we find ourselves in now. I feel like the honeymoon period of COVID, perhaps maybe not the best term to use, but the novelty of it, or the sort of shock of it, is sort of wearing off. Do you have any concerns about games development in regard to this? I'm not talking about sales or, it seems like games are doing fine, but just in terms of development, it must be, quite a worry to be running a team that perhaps is going to be working remotely for quite a long time. You've already talked about the mental toll on it. Is it something that is it something that you're sort of concerned about or thinking a lot about?
Well, yes, for sure. We talk about the implications. To your point, a fatigue in the beginning is like, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to be at home. It's going to be kind of fun for a change, And then it was like, oh, this might actually go on for a really long time. And it's not that much fun for everybody. Not everyone wants to do it. So I've noticed that fatigue. And I think all I can say to that is that, it's just kind of the new normal for a while. And, productivity just needs to be different. I can't get worked up about whether we are as productive as we were before.
Right.
It's a false goal. It's not one worth getting wound up about. It's just, these are the new variables we're dealing with, and all we can do is have communication all the time. Really, I mean that's what it comes down to. So because what you miss in the office is the, hey, how's the family, or what's happening with this or that, and so we try to make sure meetings don't. We do little things, don't make every meeting 30 minutes. Make them 25 or 55. So, because otherwise you're slam back to back to back. I find myself, I was having my feet were swelling because I was sitting for too long.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I gotta walk around more because I'm just sitting here. So this is the physical toll on myself. So I know everybody else has a similar thing. But I think communication is the big one, and not to be hypersensitive about, are we, quote, productive, all the time, because otherwise you just drive yourself crazy. Everybody loves their job. We love the kind of games we're creating. We're very passionate about it. We care what people think a lot. So that drives us more than anything.
So what do you do on a sort of a day-to-day these days? Because it's not often that you get to talk to somebody who has been working in games and working, sort of still in the weeds to a certain degree over the course of a long career, especially on the same genre. I think that's perhaps the area where you stand out quite a lot, to me at least. So what's your day-to-day look like? Like, obviously you're not, doing a lot of programming these days, I imagine. How much design stuff are you doing, or how much are you, because I often think then as well, some of your more business related roles have probably changed as well due to the acquisition by Microsoft. So what's your sort of day-to-day look like these days?
I just do podcasts all day. The good thing about my day-to-day is that it's never the same in terms of, and it might be like a certain way for a week or two, but then another month it'll be quite different. So for me now, because I'm so close to getting a product final, I'm completely in the weeds, and my focus is on the user experience. One of the things that's difficult that happens in development naturally is everybody has things that they have to do. Programmers, artists, the writers, the musicians, but they're in Jira and they're pulling tasks off the wall and they're plugging it in, and then they're moving to the next one. And oh my God, I got 4 days worth of work, but I only got 3 days to do it. We got to load balance and figure out who can do the work. Nobody's thinking about the user experience at that point. And so I make sure that I am involved at that, since I've been doing this for a long time, and playing it myself and seeing what I'm reacting to. So that's a great deal of my time that I'm doing as much as I can, right? With Wasteland 3, it's an 80 to 100 hour game with an infinite number of combinations. So I can't experience what every user is going to experience, but I'm going to make sure I hit important things. So completely in the weeds in this particular case. At the same time, we have a product that we've sort of hinted about that's going to be coming out several years from now, and then I'm already thinking about what comes out 6 years from now. And so part of what I enjoyed, so I'll spend a half a day thinking about, okay, what does a role-playing game look like in 5 or 6 years? Right. What does a role-playing game look like with Game Pass? Does that change anything? The way we think about episodics. So I love doing design when there's no time pressure whatsoever. That's like the best time. And then so I'll keep a running log of notes of like, this hasn't been done, or here's a new approach, or here's a way we can have conversations. And then I'll jump back to, I'll be playing the product, and to give an example of something where you really need to play it to experience it, like the soundtrack for Wasteland 3, I love. I mean, between Mark Morgan and then we hired Mary Ramos to do this really great 80s and biblical music that we remade. And so when I hear the music and I'm driving around the map, I'm like, oh, it's so good. And then I hear it a second time. I love that song. By the third time I heard it, I was like, okay, I'm over it. And so there was no way to stop the music from playing. So I'm like, hey guys, we got to be able to click on the radio and make the music stop. And it's just a stupid little thing, but if you're playing a game and you're having a great time and then something starts to grate on your nerves, it can start to unwind all the great experience you've been having. So that's just like an example that I'm always sort of looking at things that could become annoying to the player.
Right. It's fascinating to hear that, because one of the things that stood out to me during my, albeit brief time with Wasteland 3, I only had access to it for the past 24 hours or so. But as somebody who had played Wasteland 2 a number of months ago, sort of I went back and had a look at the director's cut. And for those, by the way, of people who, if they're not familiar with the series, if they've never played them, these are sort of, your, I guess what we now call CRPGs, the sort of isometric role-playing games, obviously in the lineage of, I want to say the lineage of Fallout, because they obviously precede Fallout. But that type of experience. And what I enjoyed so much about those early hours of Wasteland 3 was that the player onboarding seemed so tight, in a way that in Wasteland 2, I didn't find it particularly difficult or overbearing, but it felt like, role-playing game where it's like, okay, you know what, I gotta pay attention for the next couple of hours so I know what's going on. Whereas in this one, it really felt very smooth. Was there a lot of work to sort of create that ease of transition for players?
Well, we did put a lot of thought into the fact that, because we know these games are super complex in terms of tactically, they get like madness later, and then the way the story branches off in different directions, you can play it so many different ways. On top of the fact, whatever your party, you could be like, hey, we're going to be a party of brawlers, a party of snipers, and we have to balance for all that and think about all these different combinations. But at the same time, we don't want to turn somebody off who just isn't familiar with it. We want to be able to get a little bit of their sense of things. It was little things like, hey, if you don't really want to do character creation now, just go with a couple. But we let you spec your own characters, 20 minutes later if you want. Yeah. So it's something for the hardcore and something for the people that aren't familiar with it. So that onboarding process, in Wasteland 2, we're like, hey, create 6 people, go. You're like, oh my God. Creating one is a chore, and now you're making me do 6. Now, for really hardcore people, they're like, great, I'm sitting here for 2 hours, I can't wait. But so you don't want to give anything up for the hardcore, because we know that that's the audience that needs to love it. Yeah. But the streamlining of the front end, as long as you're not doing anything to the detriment, then yeah, that was a focus.
Yeah, it's funny because often when we think about like these, I don't know, would you call them like a skip for players? They don't have to make their own character. Oftentimes, especially in gaming communities, people talk about the loss that happens there. It's like, oh, well, I didn't have the opportunity to really think about my character. What I really enjoyed about Wasteland 3, I have a 2-year-old daughter, and I would never have thought to have made... I don't role play. I don't do D&D. I don't have that mind for it. But one of the pre-selected characters you had was a father and daughter duo. And I was like, oh, I'm totally doing that. And it actually made me connect more with the characters than if I had, 2 hours to come up with something myself.
That's cool.
Yeah, I found that to be really neat. Have you seen players warm to the sort of the character duos that were created? Actually as well, do you know how those were generated? Was there pitches from the team on who those characters should be?
I know that the writers were that was something that was important to the writers in terms of the kind of duos and giving a kind of something for everybody. So no, I don't have great feedback as to what players gravitated towards and what they didn't, but I know that the writers wanted to make that a thing.
Cool. Was there any of those duos that you particularly enjoy?
I like the tech heads, of course. I'm a former programmer, so I like the tech heads.
Excellent. The other aspects of the game, I guess, that are sort of different from 2. The combat's different too. Am I right in remembering that it wasn't team by team prior, right? It wasn't you could select everyone on your team and tell them where to go, and then the other team went. It was more of a role by role.
That's right.
Process.
It was initiative based, which it made combat last a lot longer, and we didn't want to lose the tactics, but we wanted to have it move a little bit quicker. And then also you could, do things like I'm going to buff my guy and have him take a certain action. But, if it's initiative based and I'm buffing my guy and he's going 10 turns later, you don't even know what the playfield still looks like. I might be buffing a guy who gets shot and by the time I get to him. And so there was more we could do tactically by allowing that. So that was done for a couple of different reasons, and it feels smooth and it moves a little bit faster.
Yeah, it has a different sense to it. It feels a lot more snappier, I guess, the process of and again, I'm very early, but it felt like I was covering a lot of ground.
It's nice because you're in control of the clock. You could just hit enter in 6 turns and it's over and it's now their turn, or I could go bop, 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 bop. But with the other one, you'd go, then they'd go, you go, they'd go. So you never felt like you were in control of the clock, and I think that also would make things feel like they were longer. So anyway, I think it was a good change, and from the beta backer build, that we got a good response to it.
Yeah, I want to talk to you a bit about some of the feedback from the beta in a little bit, but one of the really interesting things that I've heard you talk about in other interviews, and certainly it's very apparent to me whenever I play these games, is the difficulty you have in RPGs of surfacing the reactivity of the world. In that, by nature of the fact that people play these games generally sort of once, they often don't actually realize the breadth of possibilities that were on offer because they only saw the one path that they chose. They maybe didn't notice all the forks. Can you talk a bit about the sort of how you've managed to surface that and the importance of it, of making sure that players, without telegraphing it too overtly, that they know that, oh, this is an important decision I'm making?
Yeah, that was a big takeaway from Wasteland 2, is that we had this incredible reactivity that people didn't know about. Because if you just played it once, which most people do, actually most people barely make it to the end, they're so big, these games. But whatever you do just happens naturally, so you think, well, maybe everybody played it that way. You'd have to really think hard and go, well, how did they know I had that person in my party? Or how did they know I made that decision? So we wanted to telegraph that. So it was done in any number of ways. So, whether it was right up in a combat, or I'm sorry, in a conversation, to say, if you have this skill, you can say this. We have people that are the NPCs in the world are letting you know that because you did such and such, we're doing this to you. Like, they just overt. It's not enough for them to just do it because of what's a prior action. Let's at least let the player know, you shot little Johnny, and now this is why we're attacking you at this point. We do other subtle things, such as, like, I like that we like to put the player in these situations where they're they don't want to be the bad guy, but they're tempted by the loot, and so. So we'll say right up front now, because before it's like, hey, if you go do such and such, I'll reward you. This isn't quite telegraphing, but similar, well, in a different way. You wouldn't know what you were going to get, so you might not go do this kind of heinous act. But if we say, hey, you're going to get power armor and 100 things of 100 clips, ion cannon, whatever, if you go do these horrible things. Well, now the player's like, ooh, because they know the reward. Right. And that's what makes it fun, because people in role-playing games, they really do feel bad about the actions that they take. And so we like to up the ante by letting them know. So that's just like a small thing, but it's powerful. We have the newspaper boy is throughout the entire game, he's letting you know what's going on. And so it's great, like there's lots of ways you can deal with Farron Brigo. You can kill him, you can arrest him, you can strike a deal with him. And, if you strike a deal and you run him by, it says, Rangers strike a deal with mobster, Farron Brigo has no comment, and you're like, okay, now the whole world just knows I did a deal with the mob. And what do they think about that? And then, people may or may not respond even deeper than that. So we use those tools. We use the radio as you're driving around the world map. So I think that a world becomes immersive when you're sort of constantly being reminded that the things you do matter. To me, that's when all the walls fall down, and I think, oh my God, I'm really here. This world I'm experiencing it. So that's definitely our goal.
You mentioned the radio. I think I saw you tweet recently that is the feral kid from Road Warrior one of the DJs in this game?
He's not a DJ, but his name's Emil Minty, and so I'm like, oh my God, I want to get the feral kid to do some radio calls. So when you're driving around the world map, there's a lot of random stuff that happens, and so he has like a bit that he does that comes in that's very fun. So yeah, we got it. He's great. He loved it. His kids loved that he was in it. I sent him games, Game Pass codes, all sorts of stuff. It was fun.
That's excellent. Yeah, you got to keep on his good side. Make sure you don't end up on the wrong side of that boomerang.
No.
One of the I guess early game. I won't spoil anything for anyone. I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to this are obviously interested in playing the game. But one of the early interactions you sort of talked a little bit about, or the idea of them, was the telegraphing to the player one of their decisions that they made. There's a character you meet, at least there was in my playthrough, it was early though, so I imagine it's pretty standard, who, you know, is at gunpoint, held at gunpoint by somebody, and you can either let them go, the person who's holding the gun, or engage in conflict. I let them go, and then realized a few minutes later that actually 2 people were killed because she sort of told her buddies. It was like a trolley problem sort of situation that I didn't know about. Obviously that made me feel bad. I was like, oh God, if I had another way of doing that, then I would have, you know, maybe done it differently, and it telegraphed that sort of reactivity. I guess my question is, how do you make negative consequences like that not irritate players, right? Like, to me, that was cool because I didn't lose too much in that. I didn't want those people to die, but I also didn't, you know, I didn't feel aggrieved by it as a player. So how do you sort of have that reactivity and negative consequence without making players feel like annoyed by it?
Sure. Well, I think if it's going to have any consequential effect, then they need to know that it's going to happen.
Okay.
Right. That was an unintended consequence. That was something where you didn't realize it was going to result in those 2 people dying. Now, but you didn't really know them. It's not like you spent 10 hours building them up in your party and you lost a bunch of effort and work into it. So it's not annoying. But if it was something that was big like that, then that would be a whole other conversation. So it really, I guess, it has to do with the how big the impact is based upon what it is that you're doing. And that first one, that's Jodie Bell on the opening scene, where what's to give you an idea of the reactivity. If you save her, she later on can join your party. She has all sorts of different barks about what's happening in the world and what it's like to be from Arizona and be in Colorado. And then there's a busker, a singer in downtown Colorado, and you know she will sing along with the singer when she's with you. And so it's just like a little thing. You're thinking, wait, if she had died in that opening moment, I wouldn't be experiencing all of these different things. Same with like Lucia Wesson, who takes you through Garden of the Gods. She's part of the 100 Families, and her family was killed. You don't have to keep her at your party. I'm only saying what happened in the beta, but small spoilers, right? But you need her to get into the Garden of the Gods. But afterwards, you can make her a ranger or say, you know, we're done with you. But if she's with you, then when you go to her house, she talks about how she misses her father, and she walks around describing her house and how horrible it was for the people that did this to her. I think that's one of the challenging parts of the game is you start to fall in love with the characters, and then you meet one later that's more powerful, and you're like, you know, I logically should swap this person out, you know, but maybe emotionally I can't.
Yeah, the battle between the brain and the heart. It's amazing because the mantle of making these games, it's not an easy one because it seems like you have to make so much game for the user experience that'll end up being, you know, just a portion of it. But also, we're talking now, those are the moments where you light up, right? Those moments of reactivity where the world sort of winks back at you and makes you really consider what you did. In your private life when you play games, are these also are these the games that you enjoy to play as well, or is it just kind of like, you know, your speciality when it comes to work?
Well, I'd probably play a little bit of everything just to experience different things and see how it might be, you know, I might play something like Little Nightmares, which I loved and played to the end, and like just enjoy the sound design and how great it was. Or, you know, Red Dead 2, I absolutely loved, played it start to finish, or the way they did stuff with Last of Us. But in terms of playing these types of games, I don't know. I play a little bit of everything, I think, because I want to know. I almost approach it more like a student, you know, which is to learn from each thing and what they've done. It's rare that I finish games these days, but I have finished a few recently. Like I said, I finished Red Dead, and I was like, I want to finish. That was 100 hours, man. I was like, hey, at the end, you know, you're shoveling horse poop. I thought, this is a great game if I'm running around shoveling horse crap at the end and actually still enjoying myself.
You know, I don't think it's any career, you know, that's as long as yours doesn't come easy, perhaps. Maybe it does. I don't know. But I
No,
you know,
it doesn't.
I guess I'm speaking as well in terms of not just the ability to sort of, make your way through the difficulties of the business world or anything like that, but also the passion, like to keep yourself interested in something that you've been working on for that long. Like there are days when I struggle. Like I love editing videos and I love telling stories, but sometimes you just kind of have to get make a spark happen, just like change it up or do something. What do you think is, some of the reasons why you're still so entertained by your work or enlivened by it? Or are you getting bored and you're really good at faking it?
Yeah, no, I'm. This is hell. No, I don't know. I really love the art form of it all. Whenever we finish something, all I think of is all the things we could have done and all the other ways we could have innovated. I like work. I feel like in life you're either building or you're destroying, and building is the better thing. And so it's fun to build. So in this, we're building worlds, and also with just working with all my team at the office. They're as passionate and they're smart as hell and talented, and it's fun. It's you start with a blank piece of paper, nothing, and you turn it into Wasteland 3 or Fallout or whatever the next thing is. I mean, you literally start with zero, just an idea in your head, and it turns into something. That's quite a process. And I don't know, it never gets dull for me.
All right. One of the things that's happened during the process of this game is obviously the acquisition by Microsoft. How has that changed your ability to sort of stick the landing on this one? Because one of the elements, again, that popped out to me with regard to playing those early hours of Wasteland 3 was just quality of life, animations, audio, even UI and stuff. It all just felt really tight and sticky. And is that an element of having, access to big QA departments on the Microsoft end? Am I giving them too much credit? Is this all in Exile's sort of work itself? Like, how is the reality of making this game changed since the acquisition?
Well, the most important thing you can ever get in game development, and the thing that separates the greatest titles, are time. How much time did they get with the Red Dead? How much time does Blizzard get to make a game? It goes on and on about these. How long did they work on Last of Us 2? And so we would always use up more time. You could say, Brian, you want another year to work on it? Sure, we work another year. There's always more to do. So, but Microsoft gave us was more time. And that. So like you thought the beta backer build was smooth. You'll see kind of leaps and bounds. It's lots of quality. The way we filter the inventory system, the way we can filter the merchants' inventory systems, the way you can sell junk. Getting the mini map in. There was getting hotkeys in. There were so many other things that needed to be done on top of that. Yeah, you could have lived without them, right? It wouldn't be the end of the world. But given the opportunity, because at first you're like, we got to get all of these pieces, all these gears working together, and like, okay, it feels pretty good. But then you can't just think of everything all the time. You got to get it and touch it and feel it, and then you're like, okay, we really got to do more of this or less of that. And that extra time allowed us to make a smoother, better experience. And like I said, just in the last 60 days, it's 1,000 little things that we address, and so that's I would say that, and the fact that we were able to ramp up some people. We had some expertise that we didn't have before. So we have a great animation director. So he was able to. When the Dorsey bot came in, he's like, "Oh my God, this is awful. Look, the weight on the legs is wrong. Is it moving right?" We're like, "Yeah, you're right. It is horrible." And so he would help us make it. And then the before and the after, like, yeah, it looks a hell of a lot better. Or the way characters run and come to a stop, or the way people pivot their weapons around. So that became a whole conversation into itself as to how things move and how weight should be. We didn't have that position before. We do now, and he was able to make, so not everyone would probably notice the changes we made, but a lot of people will, or subconsciously, I believe people, like if something doesn't feel right, I think that oftentimes you can't describe it or put your finger on it, but it doesn't feel right, but it's still there. So bringing those extra disciplines in have helped a lot.
It's fascinating how, one or two key people can have such an effect on a product like that, like almost like a domino. It just sort of like helps everything else around it and creates a finer product at the end of it. How different has
getting a technical director improves our load times.
Right.
I mean, it's like across the board, each person I could say, and that person made these 10 things better, and that person made those 10 things better, and everyone has something that they've contributed and made it a better experience.
It's amazing, that like cascading effect. Has the team size changed much? I remember, was it Wasteland 2, you were kind of around the 80-85 mark, is that right?
I mean, we flexed up and down depending. I think the team size was probably comparable. We did the console versions much later, whereas they're being done simultaneously, so that's a bit of a different experience. So if you talk about external contractors and external QA, then it's twice the size.
Right. Another big aspect of this that I'm actually quite excited about to see what the reaction is this is going to be a Game Pass game as well. That must be very interesting to be able to have access to this audience that's probably going to give your game a whirl, right? That they wouldn't have been people who maybe would have, stopped. There'll be the people who want to play your game. There'll be the diehards. There'll be people who sort of have read reviews and stuff and are interested and will give it a go. But there won't be that like person who's just like, oh, okay, what's this? And they'll jump in. Has that affected the way the game has been designed at all? Just having that sort of access to this different type of player?
Not really. I mean, because again, we know our audience. We know what they like. Mission number one is to deliver that. The only thing we did, which I said earlier, was like streamline the beginning, so to make it more accessible. But as far as the Game Pass crowd, we make a certain kind of game. Like I was explaining to somebody also that our game is very mature. I mean, in terms of language, situations, drugs, alcohol, and so we gravitate towards media ourselves that's more mature. So we, whether it's Peaky Blinders, or ones I give, or Ozark, The Boys, that's stuff that we like. So you that's what you're in for, and I tell you, to Microsoft's credit, I early on and said, hey, let me show you some stuff that's in the game. I mean, we have a celebrity impersonator strip club. I just want you to know what you got yourself into. and they laughed, and they said, well, you look at, hey, one of them said, I like watching Archer, so, I understand. And so they haven't. So that will be interesting for the people that get in and go, holy moly, because it's not your, it's not a role playing, it's not a light role playing game. I mean, it's
right.
But it's darkly funny, I mean, most of the time it's pretty straightforward, but I mean, I think one guy has his feet nailed to the floor, and one of your smart ass comments is like, I can't believe you'll stand for that. And the guy's like, yeah, funny asshole, so you have an opportunity to use your dark humor yourself. So my point is, for the people that like that kind of thing, I think they're going to love it. But if it's not, that's okay. We're not trying to make something for everybody. We're trying to make something with a very distinct and mature voice.
Right, yeah. I was talking to another CEO of a company that was acquired, Tim Schafer, about a week ago. We were sort of chatting about some of the realities of making games like this. And he seemed really excited about the Game Pass thing, because he thinks that we're going to see more of that it's not just sort of a flash in the pan console launch kind of thing, that this is kind of the way things are going. It has obviously happened a lot in music and film and television. You've been on the bleeding edge of games publishing for a long time. What do you make of Game Pass? Is it something that you saw coming? Is it something you think that's going to be around for a long time?
Well, subscription-based businesses tend to be sort of the model these days. I think it's a net positive for sure, because there'll be a. It's like what was the I've seen some things on Netflix. What was the one? I mean, the Coen brothers did that Western thing. What was that?
Oh yeah, it's like an anthology thing, right? I can't remember the name.
Yeah, the name's escaping me, but I don't think that would exist if it wasn't for Netflix.
Right.
Or there was the animated stuff like what Sex, Death, and Robots or something like that. What you know what I'm talking about? It was
Yeah.
they did had a bunch of the great CG and animation houses create a bunch of shorts. I love that, and again, that wouldn't have existed otherwise. So I think it's going to give an opportunity because there'll be a point where retail success or physical, not in physical, just sales success is not the big major point. It's like there'll be an audience of people that love what's being produced. And I think that creatively we'll be able to do more kinds of things because we won't necessarily someday be chasing just units. So that becomes a different thing. And I also think in terms of also, well, if we're going to build a 100-hour experience, do we have to do it day one? I mean, could we have the plan and get people into it and then keep rolling content and content and content later thereon? I think it opens up, not a business model, but a different way of creation. And
Right.
so for all those reasons, I'm glad for Game Pass. And so I can't see. I mean, it's a heck of a deal. I mean, for that much money per month and the amount of games you're getting, it's. I mean, if you were to buy Wasteland 2 and Tim Schafer's game, you're probably close to what it would cost for the entire Game Pass subscription. So, yeah, it just seems like why wouldn't you at this point?
Yeah, I don't want to be too superfluous about it, but it kind of feels like a scam. You're like, this is too good to be true. Because like Microsoft Flight Simulator even came out this week. Like for the amount of money you're paying, there's so many games, and so many games, the legacy games, like old games. It's becoming more and more a thing where people who even were, I guess, a little bit skeptical of the whole thing are kind of like, oh, this is kind of hard not to chip in on. You know what I mean? You think about how much you're spending on Spotify or Netflix or something, and for the same thing, you can have just thousands of hours of good games as well. It's not like, it's like new good games that people are excited about.
Yeah, it's not like old catalog stuff.
No.
And it's going to get better and better. The Obsidian's doing great work. Our next products are going to be, bigger teams and very next gen, and they'll be in Game Pass day and date also. So across the board, we'll get better at what we do, and that they'll be right there for Game Pass. So yeah, it seems like a heck of a deal to me. It's hard to, and then you'll get xCloud streaming it in on your phone or whatever. So you'll be good to go anywhere.
Right. All right. We're finished with our Microsoft.
Yeah.
Let's.
Are they sponsor the program?
They're not sponsoring this. No. Maybe they should be. I'll have to hit up Phil after this. One of the things I want to talk to you about, sort of the previous chapter of funding as well, and it's I guess more common ground that yourself and Mr. Schaefer have is both you and Double Fine had incredible success with the world of crowdfunding. Role-playing games, CRPGs, we even saw, the Larian were showing off the Baldur's Gate 3 stuff earlier this week. Divinity has been incredibly popular as well. It seems like a really good time for role-playing games. Like, tabletop's never been as popular, it kind of feels like at this stage. I can't wait for Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 to come out, the sort of first-person angle on some of this stuff. But
I think you're going to be waiting longer as of this morning, I read.
Yeah, it looks like it. There's been more delays, and I know Cyberpunk is also, although it's so funny that role-playing game is almost so broad now, it seems meaningless to apply to a lot of those games, even though every game has role-playing elements. But right. I guess what I want to ask you about is, you guys kind of were incredibly successful on Kickstarter for Wasteland 2. You obviously had a successful FIG campaign as well for Wasteland 3. But one of the things, again, I was talking to Tim about recently was that there seemed to be a ceiling. There seemed to be a couple of projects that did really, really well, but there was like, regardless even of the popularity of those games, you kind of couldn't really get up to the levels you needed to fully fund one of these games. A lot of, obviously you were acquired, they were too, right. Previous getting publisher deals and stuff like that. What's your feeling now that you've sort of gone through the ringer on crowdfunding? Do you think that there's sort of like there's a ceiling to the amount of funding that is out there for that type of project?
Well, it's ironic that the board games raise so much more money than the video games. When I don't know. Their physical goods are probably very expensive. I don't know much about that world, but our production costs are extremely high. I mean, that was the concept with Fig, is that, hey, I felt like Kickstarter. I felt that Quickstarter was great at the time, but you could feel it waning as it went on. You remember when me and Tim did Kickstarter, there was not even a Steam Early Access program.
Right.
It was a fairly curated store, and so they started to open the floodgates up. Around, I don't know, 2013, 14, I don't know, somewhere around there. But it was after our Kickstarters, and I think that changed more than anything. One of the things that people used to say is that Kickstarter doesn't do as well because games haven't delivered. And I never believed that. I never thought that was really the case. I delivered, Tim delivered. Most of us delivered, and people knew that there was a risk associated with it. And hey, look at board games raising $12 million. So I felt that it was just I think it got to the point where people were saying, okay, I could crowdfund a game that I'm going to see in 3 years, but I've got 40 games in my Steam library that I bought on sale that I haven't even played yet. and so, like, why am I doing this? And so I think it got harder and harder to generate excitement, on top of the fact that early days Kickstarter, we were very much fulfilling what people were being denied. Which is like, we wanted to make a post-apocalyptic Wasteland,
right?
And I truly could not get it financed. I mean, it was no bullshit. I mean, it couldn't happen. It was not going to happen unless the audience did it. And so, if you wanted a point-and-click adventure game, there weren't very many of those. With Obsidian did their Pillars, right, which is kind of their Baldur's Gate real-time with pause game. Hadn't been a lot of those from a reputable developer, something large of scale. So these were things that users were denied for whatever reason. So we were able to fill that all in. Well, you flash forward years later, kind of the categories that had been missing had been filled. So now you couldn't rely on the fact that you didn't get this. Now it's like, okay, you've got a lot of them, but this one's going to be much better. And it's harder to generate excitement that way. So Fig was interesting, which was, okay, hey, I know that people, they never get bored of making money. Like, that's always a good thing. So like, if we could make people a profit, maybe we could start getting them up to $10 million, $20 million and generate returns for people. In fact, on Wasteland 3, we generated a 40% profit return for our investors in like 2.5 years. So
wow, geez.
It's not a 10x like a VC likes, but hey, it's better than I get with my investments. So, could that have worked? I don't know. Could we have made the pitch and continued to build that up over a long period of time? Hard to say. The challenge with Fig, of course, is that there's not that many product or developers that I think people would trust enough to put up the $10 million to fund a big game like that. Even on Kickstarter, was always a handful of titles each year that generated most of the business. So with Fig, I should say, even if you got half of the big titles, that's still not a huge business. So how do you build out that challenge? But that's a whole long story. I look at like what Devolver's doing and raising funds, and they're doing a great job. And so that's a similar model, and they've gotten great returns. So I actually could see, as you start raising buckets of money for a bunch of products, you probably have a better chance of hitting some higher numbers. But that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, and last point on this, it's interesting that Obsidian, Double Fine, and yourselves have all sort of been under the wing of Microsoft. You don't have to worry about a lot of that stuff anymore. Are you glad to be done with that part of the business? Because obviously, like, scrapping for money is something that has been part of your story for decades. Like, are you happy to be able to put that behind you and just sort of like mostly focus on the weeds, like we were talking at the start of this conversation?
Yeah, I don't think any creative person likes scrapping for money. If you could find one, please point him out. Well, he deserved the job. Yeah, I spent 30 to 40% of my time chasing money. So whether it was preparing for the next Kickstarter or crowdfunding campaign, negotiating international contracts, chasing down strategic partners to raise money. It was always a super hustle, getting it into early access and getting some money from that. Whatever it was always these guns at your head all the time. And, it's not easy to be creative when you have that kind of pressure on you at every moment. So now when you kind of sit back for a moment and go, let's just focus on just the product. It's even better than when you're doing development for others. You have these contracts that you have to deliver, and some publishers are better than others, so don't get me wrong, but some of them are very much like, look, you promised 20 weapons and you delivered 19, you're not getting paid, and so you're chasing down the 20th weapon, and meanwhile the big picture is moving along. You just want to get to that, or you get to the point where like, hey, this is really fun. Hey guys, let's spend more time with this. That was really working. Well, we're not going to get paid for that, so you can't spend. So you can see how it can become not a great experience. So this part of the process, like I said, I'm thinking about quality of life with something that's shipping next week. I'm thinking about things 2 years from now, 4 years from now, and it's all creativity or user experience driven, not what clever way am I going to be able to have to finance the business.
Right, yeah. Well, I'm excited to see that you're still making games, excited to see that there are still Wasteland games coming out, and I'm very excited to see what people think of Wasteland 3 when it's out, which it is as of right now. Congratulations. Do you know how you're going to celebrate? This is something we've been talking to studios a little bit about. Like, how do you celebrate this remotely with your team?
So, you think about, so for us, the closest thing to a live event is watching people play your game.
Right.
Like that's like us getting up on, that's like us rehearsing all year and getting up on stage and giving our concert. So we are likely to, find a streamer or two that we like. We'll all get into teams and we'll all watch together on launch and watch someone enjoy our experience. I think that's probably going to be the most fun that we'll have. To just see it through someone else's eyes.
Excellent. And then worry about patching it, right?
Yeah. Or be the God forbid something breaks while they're streaming it. It's sort of like white knuckled watching it. They got 20,000 people watching them. And you're like, oh, it's a bug. Yeah. So that part, it's a little high wire there on that.
Excellent. Well, you're still doing it, so you must still love it. Brian Fargo, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you.
Excellent. And thank you all for listening to the podcast or watching if you're watching here on youtube.com/noclipvideo. You can follow us on Twitter @noclipvideo. I'm at Danny O'Dwyer. Of course, you can, we are fans of crowdfunding here, of course, as well. We are completely funded by our folks over at Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/noclip to help us make more work. Hope you're doing okay out there, and we'll see you next time on the podcast. Take care.